to the Strong.Sistas YouTube channel. In today's video, we have the honor of having our friend Morley Robbins return to continue the iron overload discussion.
The return of Morley Robbins. So if you haven't checked out the first video on iron overload, you're going to want to listen to that first, so I'll link it in the description below. Today, we address many of the questions that you guys left in the comment section, so thank you for those. And it was a full hour and 20-minute discussion just based on those questions. So we didn't actually get to our next topic at hand, which is magnesium, because Morley is the magnesium man. So that's coming, stay tuned. But for now, let's get back to iron and copper. Hope you guys enjoy.
Hey Morley, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for returning. The first video on iron overload was a huge success and huge favorite, I think, of our audience. Our dad actually called us this morning and said, wow, I love that video, guys. It was great. Morley was so great. So I think my dad had a lot of takeaways, and that's like hard because he doesn't really listen to many of our videos. So this one.
Wow, that's high praise.
Mm-hmm.
Give your dad a hug and a high five from me, okay?
Well, he does knuckle fives.
Yeah, he doesn't do the...
He would give Morley a knuckle five.
Knuckle five, that's fine, whatever.
So I think in this video, we're going to just wrap up some loose strings on the iron discussion and bring up a few other questions that people brought up in the last video, and then we'll eventually move on to magnesium, since you are magnesium man.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, is it okay if we just start with some of the iron questions that people had?
Sure, and just remember, in our next conversation, we're going to talk about the bake-off between the Strong.Sistas.
Yes, we're going to be reviewing our blood tests and our hair and tissue mineral analysis and compare those two and compare to see who is more minerally deficient.
Or who's more minerally balanced.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So correct.
The last may not be first. We don't know.
That's true.
But the first may not be first either.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. It's tricky.
So correct me. I'm going to try to summarize the last video in like a sentence or two. Just due to just the modern era of like pollution and then just the food system just being so messed up, it's safe to say that we are all kind of overexposed to iron. And so we have an iron dysregulation problem in our body. And again, due to kind of the messed up food system, our soil is really depleted in copper. And so a lot of humans are like deficient in copper. And so those two things just exacerbate the problem. And so we're just very imbalanced with our iron and copper ratios.
That's very good. In one sentence, I'm impressed.
Well, we were so like that conversation really sparked some things in us. So we actually went to donate blood today.
Yeah. I wondered what was going on. It's like, I don't remember those tattoos before.
Yeah. But we get there and they test your hemoglobin and your blood pressure. Yeah. My hemoglobin for the first test was 12.2, and they said, oh, that's too low. Yeah. And so I said, can you test again? And so they tested, and I was 12.6. And so the cutoff is apparently 12.5.
Right.
But can you remind us, like, what is the hemoglobin blood test? That's only one of 3 markers, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And how did they change the finger for the test?
Yeah, they tested middle finger on this hand and then middle finger on this hand. I'm not going to put that middle finger up, but.
Okay. So are you left-handed or right-handed?
I'm right-handed, and they tested the right hand.
That's interesting. Okay. So yeah, 70% of the iron in the body is found in hemoglobin, and that's the waiter. You know, we talked about that. Waiter carrying oxygen. And again, that's the biggest bulk of iron in the body. And that test was used exclusively from like 1860 to 1972. And then in the early 70s, a group of UK-based hematologists turned the spotlight to ferritin, just to thoroughly confuse everybody. And less than 10% of the body iron is found in ferritin, but ferritin is supposed to be inside the cell, not in the blood. And when it shows up in the blood, it's a problem. It means that there's pathology. And especially when it's high, it's usually liver pathology when ferritin goes high. So anything over 150 for a woman or 300 for a man would be considered high. And it can go into the thousands. I mean, there's some people who have conditions that have had their serum ferritin is 10,000.
Wow.
It's like they're just like magnets. So the problem is that ferritin can go low. Well, ferritin can go low because there's not enough bioavailable copper and the spleen doesn't work right. And then ferritin will go low as a result of that. But again, it's the same problem. We don't have bioavailable copper. It isn't a lack of iron. It's the fact that iron is stuck. It's not recycling the way it's supposed to. And then the third marker for iron is called serum iron, or it might be called total iron. And what that's measuring is the recycling iron in the body, and it's about 3 or 4% of the total body iron. It's a very small percentage, but it's a very important percentage because it reveals how well the body is recycling iron. Because every day we need 24 milligrams of iron from our recycling system, not from our diet. You don't get iron from your diet. Our ancestors are turning over in their grave at the amount of iron people are putting past their lips. And once it gets in, the only way to get it out is to do what you guys did today, and that's to donate blood. And then the biological advantage that women have over men is that, well, women outlive men for 2 reasons.
We're smarter.
We're smarter, and they typically are able to have a monthly blood loss for about 40 years. And that the ability to lower the iron footprint is what gives them a biological advantage. And they do tend to outlive men under normal circumstances.
So I think that's a good starting place for one of our questions, because you mentioned in the last video that one of the easiest things that someone can do to reduce the iron levels in our bodies is to donate blood.
Yes, so somebody was wondering why it would be helpful to release stored iron in the blood if the overload problem is iron accumulating in the organs and the tissues.
Great, it's a great question. And I absolutely love the fact that you guys went to donate today. That's perfect timing. That's very, very funny, actually. A very graphic reminder for people. When the body, when you donate a pint of blood, it's 500 milliliters of blood, and about 50% of it is iron. So you're giving up about 250 milligrams of iron. And so in a typical woman's body, you have about 4,000 milligrams of iron, and in a guy's body, you have about 5,000 milligrams of iron. So it's not at all life-threatening, but it is a shock to the system. That's a big loss of iron. And so as soon as that happens, the loss of blood and the loss of iron triggers a hormone called erythropoietin. It's also called EPO.
Okay.
And that's the drug that causes all the scandals in athletics. Because athletes want more EPO, so they have more red blood cells, so they have more oxygen, so they have more energy, so they have more bling at the winner's circle, okay? And so EPO, very powerful hormone produced in the adrenal glands of the kidney, and it has 2 signals. Signal number 1 is it tells the bone marrow of the long bones, like your long leg bones and your hip bone and your long arm bone, have bone marrow that is designed to make new blood and new bone. They're very, very cool how it works. But the first signal is to tell the bone marrow, you got to start making some new blood cells, new red blood cells. And they're called erythroid precursor cells. And then those are little babies, and then they grow up and they go through adolescence and become reticulocytes, and then they become adults and become red blood cells. And that process only takes a couple days. But there's a very specific There are like 7 stages in the production from initiation, the hatching, to the actual release of the red blood cell. The second signal that the EPO sends out is to tell the tissue that's holding on to the stored iron, let go of that iron. We need it in the bone marrow. And that's why it's so important to do the donation, because it triggers this event that then releases the iron out of storage.
Okay, so it helps the extra iron that's being stored in the tissue by getting
to get mobilized.
Because I guess some people would assume like, okay, that iron in your tissues, it's just stuck there forever. And so if you donate blood, then your body's just going to, I don't know, use from your food to refill those stores. So that's a good point. Is it triggers the release of iron from your tissues.
Now keep in mind, we're talking about one of the most sophisticated and complicated aspects of human physiology. And we're trying to reduce it to sound bites, right? So we got to be careful. I mean, there's a limit to, if I were to take a dive into all that I do know,
yeah,
people would just like, oh, it's too much. I can't take it.
Yeah.
But the point is, gotta keep it simple, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so it's an important understanding to realize that we are being overexposed to iron. We're being undernourished in copper and retinol and a number of other things that we'll talk about. And this has been transitioning for about 100 years, very slowly. And at the margin, each decision made perfect sense. When you look at it in totality, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And then it explains why everyone is struggling with their health.
So you said 100 years. It's funny that this just all ties up with like just increase in modern industrialization and the increase in processed food and the degradation of our soils. It's just like all related, and it's sad, but it's having huge health consequences.
Yeah, I mean, the first time that they knew that iron had a negative effect in a biological setting was in 1894 at Cambridge University. And it was Dr. Fenton who, there's a famous reaction called the Fenton reaction, when iron reacts with hydrogen peroxide to create the hydroxyl radical, which is the most destructive biomolecule on planet Earth. Think about that. Iron mixing with hydrogen peroxide creates the most destructive molecule. Dr. Fenton explained this in 1894. And then on the heels of that, things started to change. Started to change farming, started to change food processing. And pharmaceuticals were still in their infancy before 1900, but it wasn't too long after that. And then everything really changed after the First World War. Very significant turning point for civilization was that worldwide conflict.
Was it what? Worldwide what?
Worldwide conflict.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to another question that I think just like a simple thing regarding iron. So somebody asked, what about cast iron pans for cooking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great book that we talked about last time was Weston A. Price's book on physical degeneration, nutrition and physical degeneration. Do you think he found a lot of cast iron pans around the world? He did. Actually did. Even in tropical climates, they were using cast iron pans. They still cooked with things. So a lot of confusion about that. And, you know, Dr. Liz and I use cast iron every morning and for most of our meals. When the cast iron is properly seasoned, you don't have to worry about it. You know, when you're cooking with a cast iron pan, you want to make sure you have good fats and oils. Mm-hmm. Throw in some onion and garlic, and you can just relax knowing that you're going to make a very yummy meal. The one thing you don't want to do there are two things you don't want to do with a cast iron pan. One, you don't ever want to steam food in it because it will increase the iron content of the food you're steaming. And second, you don't ever want to wash it. You don't scrub out the oil finish in the pan because you're going to cause it to rust. So again, once you've properly treated a cast iron skillet, you don't have to worry about it. It's an amazing resource. It cooks food better, and it's just it's a staple in better culinary circles, believe it or not.
I read an article by Dr. Ray Peets where he brought up that you shouldn't use cast iron pans if you're cooking something that's acidic. So like if you're using an acidic sauce. So can you talk a little bit, like what's an example of cooking something that you wouldn't cook in a cast iron?
Tomato sauce. Yeah.
Okay.
Because tomatoes are very acidic.
Yeah.
Right.
I was reading that the acidity helps your body absorb more of the iron. So don't combine like something like red meat with an acidic fruit too.
Mm-hmm. Right. Again, it's just there's the challenge is that there's a lot of partial information on the internet.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people take the time to give you the full Monty. So you just have to be mindful that people do have it. There's no shortage of opinions on the internet. We know that. Yeah. It's not always the truth or the full truth in any event.
We went ahead and ordered some Vision glassware pans.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of taking a route, just not having to deal with any of the extra iron.
Well,
potentially.
It's funny that he said don't scrub your cast irons. We
scrubbed ours.
Scrubbed our cast irons.
Mm-hmm. A lot of people do because they've not been trained by their grandmother or their great grandmother.
Our mom would be upset at us because she always makes sure that she pours olive oil on top of the cast iron before she puts it into the cupboard. She's so smart. Mama always knows best.
Moms are brilliant, aren't they? Come on. Yeah.
Okay.
What did your mom think of this video? Did your mom watch this?
I don't think she tuned in yet.
She probably didn't, but she'll be
okay.
in.
All right.
Okay. Protocol, and so when we move home in about a month, we're gonna all be on it.
Yeah, we're temporarily moving in with our parents before we move to the farm. But we're convincing her to go donate blood because women have a higher tendency to store iron, and so for women who are who have amenorrhea like me, or menopausal women, like their iron levels are probably really high, and I think that it's really important for her to do that. So
it's a great idea. How old is your mom?
68, and she's turning 69 in a few months. Someone would look at her and be like, that woman's 50. 40.
That's great.
So
she's about a year older than me, and so she's definitely menopausal, right? Yeah. So she definitely wants to be donating blood for the rest of her life.
Yeah. Look at her. Yeah. Okay, so the biggest final question from last video was regarding vitamin A, and people saying that we turn all of the vitamin A we consume from any source eventually gets turned into retinoic acid. Saying we have a retinol deficiency is inaccurate, as we can't measure vitamin A in the blood as a good indicator either.
Okay, hold on. So I think, just for the audience, I think what this person is saying, or in the comments, they said that like all forms of vitamin A, so they're meaning like liver, so vitamin A from liver and like cod liver oil is the same as like beta carotene, kind of, right?
I don't know. They said that different studies show that it all gets converted into the same thing, and that measuring our vitamin A from our blood is similar to iron, where it doesn't paint the full picture. We would need to literally do like a biopsy of the liver to understand the accumulation. So
that's probably valid.
That was probably the largest question regarding what you said from the last video. So I don't know if you have a counter argument for this, or if you kind of agree with it.
Morley's prepared.
Yeah, what does Morley think?
Well, again, Morley approaches this with common sense. So our ancestors were raised on cod liver oil. You know, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents, they grew up with cod liver oil. And they didn't have the level of diabetes, dementia, and dysfunction that we have today. And that's a fact. And again, I didn't know any of these nutrient issues or mineral issues. I had no idea that iron and sugar have a relationship. I never knew that fats and copper had a relationship. And if you don't know that, the world is a very different place. and I didn't know about magnesium burn rate and things like that. So what's very clear from the early research, and I'm talking 19 teens and 1920s and 1930s, tremendous focus on the importance of retinol in human metabolism. And they were studying vitamin D, but you know what they did with it? They threw it away because they said it wasn't important. Well, what did they know, right? Actually, I think they knew a whole lot. And so, again, we live in a very Byzantine era now, where people are afraid to go outside without a mask. People are afraid to touch each other now. The whole world has changed because of this COVID 1984. And it's insane what it's done to the mindset of humanity. And it's entirely engineered. So you have to understand that there's a lot of programming that's taking place. So the bottom line is the human body needs to be able to metabolize and neutralize oxygen. Very simple. 21% of it's in the air. And if we don't neutralize it, if we don't harness it, it's going to cause rust inside our body. And there's only one way to do it. And that's to make sure that we have bioavailable copper working through dozens and dozens of copper-based enzymes that allow us to work without oxygen. Well, you can't load copper into key enzymes unless you have retinoic acid. And that's a fact. Cannot, again, take it up with Barber and Cousins, 1987. They're the ones that figured out that you got to have retinoic acid to load copper into ceruloplasmin. One of the most important scientific discoveries on the planet that never got a Nobel Prize. Why? Because it revealed too much. That's how the body really works. And so most people, and certainly most doctors, and worse yet, most nutritionists don't know what ceruloplasmin is, don't know about the 24 enzyme functions that it's responsible for, don't understand its historical function on the planet, going all the way back to the great oxygen event, because the very enzymes that saved life forms 2.5 billion years ago are present in ceruloplasmin today. I think that's significant.
Yeah.
I think it's really very important.
Can you dive into ceruloplasmin just a little bit? I know it's extremely complex.
Well, it's the biggest protein in the human body.
Okay.
1,066 amino acids. And it's designed to have 8 copper atoms inside it. And those copper atoms get inserted inside a part of the cell called the endoplasmic reticulum. It's called ER. And it's a very important function to make that protein, but then you got to load those coppers in a very specific sequence. And there's genius behind it. Now, the bulk of this is happening in our liver, but ceruloplasmin is made in our digestive tract, in our brain cells, in many organs around our body, because oxygen isn't just touching our liver, is it? No, it's all over. And there's a very significant portion of it is found in our blood. And that 95% of what's called serum copper in our blood, is bound to ceruloplasmin. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. When they first discovered it, the numbers were as high as 98%. Now, in the modern era, in the enlightened era, or we're so smart era, I've seen studies that say it's as low as 70% now. That's a frightening change in physiology. To go from 98% of the copper is in ceruloplasmin to 70%, that's a dramatic change in how the body is processing oxygen and preventing oxidative stress.
Does that have any relationship with iron?
Absolutely it does. I mean, again, the work of Jamie Collins at the University of Florida in Gainesville, he's been studying this for a couple decades now. But when you have too much iron in your diet and in your supplement routine, it impacts copper enzymes. And that's a fact. It's not like, well, sort of, it's Tuesday and it's okay, we don't have to worry about it. It's like, no, stop. Again, the world has been trained to think that they're anemic. And I get that there are a lot of people who think they're anemic, but they don't understand how the recycling system works. And they don't understand how dependent that recycling system is on bioavailable copper, which is dependent on retinol. And so the confusion around this is legendary. And again, because this is not taught in nutrition school, because it's not taught in nursing schools, because it's not taught in doctor schools, well, then people just don't know about it. Yeah. But when you go into the literature and you find out that actually there is a class of people who do know about this and they're very passionate about it, and then they begin to explain why this protein is so important and how it expresses in different ways around the body, it's like, it's a game changer. And so what we've got is a famous saying, missing information equals missing truth. And there's a lot of people in very notable positions in society as practitioners who have missing information. They don't know about copper. They don't know about bioavailable copper. They don't know about ceruloplasmin. And to them, the world is a scary place because they believe in disease. And it's a very, here's an example. In India, people who have healthy levels of ceruloplasmin do not get malaria. People who do not have healthy ceruloplasmin must take hydroxychloroquine for the rest of their life. That's what we're talking about, is the ability of the body to regulate itself, regulate the oxygen, and regulate the iron. And when iron mixes with oxygen, what does it make? It makes rust, exactly. And I think there needs to be more understanding about that. And the world has been trained, like circus bears, to believe in the Merck manual, and there's thousands of different ways that we are going to get sick. And it's like, no, there's only one mechanism. It just expresses in different ways in different tissue, depending upon your family history, depending upon your diet, depending upon your emotional patterns. And it's absolutely amazing, but there really is only one mechanism. And it's all the oxygen getting tweaked and the iron reacting with it. And then suddenly we have a chain reaction inside the body.
So, okay, let me try to summarize. So this ceruloplasmin protein. Ceruloplasmin protein has a lot of copper molecules inside of it, and one of its main jobs is to just mitigate oxidative stress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it reduces the amount of times that iron and oxygen come into contact with each other. And so for us, we used to have 95%. 95?
95 is a good number.
95% in our blood, and that has reduced to 70% in our blood. And that is correlated with an increase in oxidative stress that humans are seeing. And that's because Absolutely. Iron and oxygen are coming into contact and forming rust.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Very, very well said. And so when we start the process of making energy in our mitochondria creates reactive oxygen species. Oxidative stress is a byproduct. It's the exhaust of making energy, right? When we start to accumulate those reactive oxygen species, that the term that's used in the literature and in clinical circles is called oxidative stress. So having reactive oxygen species is stage 1. Having oxidative stress becomes stage 2. There's more reactive oxygen species. Stage 3 is called inflammation. There's an accumulation of so much oxidative stress that it has its own classification, And then stage 4 is called cytotoxicity. It's also called cancer. And so there's a very specific hierarchy of how these reactive oxygen species build in the body. And the folks who figured this out are based in the UK, Gutteridge and Hallowell, and they've published for decades. Their iron textbooks are the standard for all programs in nutrition and in medicine. Gutteridge and Hallowell. They're amazing. They're very, very readable. And it's important for people to know that iron is very important, but it's not our friend. It's a very reactive element that we've been misled by a lot of websites to think that we need more and more of it, and we don't.
So you're saying that reactive oxidative species, ROS, is like a natural byproduct of metabolism.
Exactly. Right.
But we just want to stop it we want to stop it from converting from ROS to oxidative stress. And we can do that by having our iron and copper levels more balanced.
Exactly. We're never going to be able to stop reactive oxygen species. That is just a part of biology. What we want to be able to do is have a balance between the production of reactive oxygen species and the elimination of reactive oxygen species by what are called antioxidant enzymes. And that what we're looking for in the body is a balance between those two. Well, the bulk of the reactive oxygen species interact with iron. The bulk of the antioxidant enzymes key off of copper. That's the balance that's needed in the body, why they're so important. Does that make sense?
Yes. So somebody asked the relationship between something like an autoimmune disease, so like MS, and mineral deficiency. So you're saying everything, literally everything stems back to ROS becoming oxidative stress.
And that
Right. And what is the starting point for all conditions, all labels that people have, is what's called energy deficiency. It's the failure of the mitochondria to be able to make optimal ATP. Now, multiple sclerosis I've studied very, very carefully. It's an amazing condition, and I won't become a gearhead on you, but there are, like, I could identify 12 different functions that break down in multiple sclerosis, and they all relate to the lack of ATP production, the lack of bioavailable copper, and there's a whole series of events that take place. Cholesterol doesn't get recycled properly in the brain. We got to have cholesterol in order to make myelin, and the cells in the brain that are very important for this are called oligodendrocytes. They're really important, and they make myelin. Myelin is 70% of the cholesterol in our brain goes to make myelin, which is like the covering on the wires for all the appliances we use. If you don't have that myelin sheath on your nerves, they're gonna fritz out. Well, that's what MS is. Multiple sclerosis is the nerve endings getting frayed. They can't be remyelinated properly because there isn't enough bioavailable copper to make the mitochondria and the oligodendrocytes work properly. And there's a whole bunch of other things, but the bottom line is multiple sclerosis, like all of the forms of neurodegeneration, is a buildup or a failure to have adequate levels of copper and a buildup of iron, which then creates this environment of oxidative stress. And then all the physiology of the brain starts to change because of it. And there's a particular chemical that they use to study MS. It's called cuprizone, 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 and it's a particular chemical that's used to suck copper out of the brain and out of the livers of the mice that they're using to study multiple sclerosis. And when they feed mice cuprizone, guess what happens? They get multiple sclerosis like that.
iron dysregulation.
And iron dysregulation. And so basically, folks who do have multiple sclerosis, it's like they're eating cuprazone. They don't have enough bioavailable copper. Now, there's another theory out there about parasitic impact. Well, parasites are very hard on copper status, and they're very demanding, and it really it's very draining to the copper metabolism to have parasites. So I'm not agnostic about parasites, but we've got to understand, or about pathogens in general. We have to understand they all live on excess iron, but they have varying degrees of relationship with the other minerals and metals in our body. So people just need to realize that there's a whole nother world below the Merck manual about how the minerals are dysfunctioning inside the body. And so we've got to get past that veneer of disease and find out what's really going on inside the body. Where's the imbalance, and where's the oxidative stress taking place?
Yeah.
So well, in terms of like autoimmune conditions and MS, if somebody were to put into place the root cause protocol and address these underlying issues of mineral imbalance, would they see improvements, or is it like too far gone? Like this is something you would do to avoid that in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you about a conversation I had with a noted neurologist here in Chapel Hill. And he invited me to his office, and he said, Morley, I have two types of patients, two types of MS patients. He specialized in MS. He said, I have stable and unstable. He says, it doesn't matter what I do, the unstable ones die. He said, I think you know why. I said, yeah, I do know why. And he said, I'm interested in doing a study with 100 of my patients and see how they respond to your RCP protocol. I said, that's great. Now, again, that was all pre-COVID 1984. He's been very distracted since then. We haven't come back to that conversation, which took place in February of this year. So I don't know whether that study will actually get off the ground, but I don't want to paint a rosy picture that, oh, just do the RCP and everything's going to be fine. But what you've got to, what folks who may have autoimmune conditions, especially something like MS, they've got to understand that there's absolutely a mineral component to it. The minerals are completely dysregulated. There's absolutely an energy deficiency component to it. And what I can tell you with absolute conviction is that the medications that they're taking are not resolving the mineral dysregulation that's underlying the problem. And one of the leading theories about autoimmune, which has been developed by three noted women, Rebecca King at Mayo Clinic, and Nancy Andrews, who's the former dean of the medical school here in Duke University, and Marianne Wesling-Resnick. This was prior to her untimely death last August from breast cancer. But these three women basically were converging their thoughts about the fact that when the iron recycling program doesn't work right, iron accumulates in macrophages, which are the Pac-Men that gobble up the dying red blood cells. And when macrophages get full of iron, they don't think right. And they start to act out, and they start to attack healthy tissue. And so their theory was that it was this iron dysregulation is behind all autoimmune. Now think about this. Back in 1900, there was no autoimmune. And now there's over 100 different forms of autoimmune. So something's changed in our environment.
So both Sarah and I had autoimmune conditions, and we went carnivore, and my blood work before carnivore showed high ANA, and then after 5 months of going full carnivore, my ANA was zero. Nothing showed up, and so I kind of considered that like healing my autoimmune. What do you think happened in that change? Now beforehand I was keto, but I was very plant-based keto, and then went full carnivore, obviously, and did more of a nose-to-tail carnivore approach. So I was eating a lot of organs, but zero carbs.
Well, if you were eating organ meats, you were getting a much more balanced mineral profile, but you're especially getting copper because the organs don't work without energy. You can't make energy without copper. And so the really challenging part of these conversations is realizing just how little copper we need in order to have a healthy life. And when you take just a little pinch away from a human being, like they're doing, we don't work right. And then you give 5 pinches of iron, and it just compounds the problem. And that's the part that most people don't know what minerals are. Most people don't know what enzymes are. Enzymes are little engines that make all the transactions. Well, every enzyme has a key, a mineral key that runs the enzyme. And if that mineral key is not there, well, the engine doesn't work. And so I think your change in diet allowed a better metabolic functioning.
Yeah.
And if you're going after organ meats, that dramatically changed your energy production in your body. Again, I don't know that much about ANA. I'm not sure what it's actually exhibiting, but again, the body responds to proper nutrients and proper energy production.
But I think something that you said there is important. Some people get this idea of like, oh, okay, so I need more copper, so they think the more the better. But what you just said was an important point. We don't necessarily need that much more. Copper operates in a tight window to begin with, and so if we just increase a little bit and work on reducing our iron, that's probably good.
That was an insightful comment that we got. Somebody mentioned that they became aware they were iron overloaded, so they started supplementing copper, and then they actually got worse. And so they only were able to fix their problem when they compared their hair mineral analysis tests to their blood work, and then realized they needed to supplement specifically with a small amount of zinc. So it's all very heavily interrelated, and you can't just like go far in one.
That's right. And again, the key is there are very few copper supplements that really become bioavailable. That's one of the great tragedies, is that the way it's designed, the way the system is designed, is the copper is supposed to be in the soil that feeds the microbes that put the metal into the root system of the plant, that we can either eat the plant or the animal eating the plant. And that's how we get the copper. It's already been put into a form that our body can metabolize. And getting it out of a supplement bottle is not going to work.
Yeah.
And people they're very impatient. They want to get well yesterday, and they rush to the store and get copper. And yes, that form of copper can be very disruptive.
Whole food copper sources, like your
Well, again, the bee pollen, the whole food vitamin C, real vitamin C, not ascorbic acid, and grass-fed beef liver it's a tremendous trio to really restore the copper status. There may only be 1 or 2 supplements out there that are worth consideration, and they're not the easiest things to work with. One is from reverse skin aging. Lauren Pickard is an absolute genius with copper, and he's developed a skin cream. And there's a sublingual based on his copper. It's called GHK peptide. And again, there are a lot of products out there, a lot of products, and most of them do not work, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so you mentioned also cod liver oil. Mm-hmm. So I know that is pretty controversial in like the bioenergetic repeat community. But we were chatting offline, and you were saying that you really only suggest like a few brands because other brands aren't very good. I think that the main argument in the repeat community is that cod liver oil is essentially a polyunsaturated fat, and polyunsaturated fats can oxidize in human bodies because we are warm-blooded animals, 98-ish degrees. And so even that cod liver oil can oxidize in the body. And so Ray Peat brings up that polyunsaturated fats plus iron, that combination is actually what causes lipofuscin. And so lipofuscin is these like age spots that you see. I don't see any on Morley. Looking good. Like those brown spots on skins that you see in elder people. So that kind of, I'm curious to hear your argument against that, and potentially you believe that, with bad cod liver oil or bad PUFA sources?
Again, missing information equals missing truth. And what you've just shared about what Ray Peat says is valid, but there's missing information. If you don't know about lipooxygenase enzymes, and they're lipooxygenase enzymes, they're really powerful, but they're neutralized by bioavailable copper. We can relax. And so, yes, those age spots that he's talking about, again, it's the accumulation of iron, ding, ding, ding. And yeah, they're really, they're not good. But if you don't understand how the body has natural mechanisms to neutralize lipooxygenase enzymes, I think there's like a dozen of them. Again, it's just the world of fat is bar none the most confusing subject on the planet.
Lipids are like way over my head.
Way over my head too. I mean, it's layers and layers of a parallel universe that are very overwhelming and taxing until you find out that the body likes to use bioavailable copper to metabolize fat. Well, then things start to make more sense. Again, Mother Nature did not put us on this planet and then say, "Well, I'm really gonna screw you. Yeah, good luck. I hope it works out for you." And the tragedy is that we've been, as a society, we've been subjected to all sorts of dietary restrictions. Stop eating cholesterol. Stop eating this and stop eating that. Oh, you need more of this, you need more of that. And everything's a mononutrient. They never give us the whole picture. And the whole design of the RCP is to give people the whole picture and to give them a sense of how the body really works. We're trying to do two things at once with the RCP. We're trying to increase energy and we're trying to lower exhaust. Wow, what a novel idea. And I absolutely understand Ray Peat's point about you got to be careful of the lipids, but you've also got to understand the totality of lipid metabolism. And if you don't understand how lipooxygenase enzymes are neutralized, well, then you're doing a disservice to people that are worrying about this and that. And so, again, it would be fun to have a debate with the Ray Peat side versus the copper side of the equation, and find out where we disagree, but also find out where we do agree. And there's no better source of energy than saturated fat.
Yeah, I think that's an agreement. Like, that's the underlying thing. Saturated fat is good. It is silly that it is demonized.
And I think you both agree on not having excess like vegetable oils. It's more just like you feel as though there's more benefits to the cod liver oil than potential downsides.
Again, you've got to select the right brand.
What brand?
The brands that I've recommended over the years are Rositas, and that's sold by a company called Corganic, CORGANIC.com. And Jigsaw sells a Alaskan cod liver oil. Both of those seem to be very valid and viable inside our body. There are over 100 different brands out there.
Yeah.
And the class of cod liver oil that I'm most against is fermented cod liver oil. Well, then we've just violated the Weston A. Price community because they think that fermented is where it's at, and it's not. Again, you talk about creating oxidative stress. Well, you don't ferment cod liver oil. It was never fermented from the beginning. And there's very rich history about that. And that it's another source of conflict in the community. And your point at the beginning about people are confused, they don't know where to turn, it's valid. There's a lot of very convincing and compelling people out there And we all feel very passionate about what we believe. But again, I keep bringing people back to, let's try to deal with the oxygen.
Mhm.
And let's try to make more energy and less exhaust.
Yeah.
And that's really where it's at. To me, if we're really trying to help people get healthy, that's the one thing you've got to focus on. And I would be excited to see people like Ray Peat or Chris Masterjohn or Garrett Smith or people like that get back to this whole issue about how are you dealing with the oxygen molecule? What are you doing to try to deal with that?
Yeah.
So I just, again, and it's not to pit one against the other, but let's get to a common frame of reference and see what we do agree on, and begin to see where does the agreement begin to fissure and why. Where's the misunderstanding? Where's the missing information that's creating this polarizing dynamic in the community?
It's almost like how our bodies are dealing with oxygen. That's like the baseline. And if we don't have that baseline, then like haywire can happen everywhere else. And so we need to return to that baseline to see, okay, are we covering our grounds there? Okay, then let's move up to these other topics.
Yeah, and I know that what Ray Peat is worrying about is lipid peroxidation. And once you have one oxidative event in fats, it's going to be 10 or 15 that follow it. Well, what stops lipid peroxidation in its tracks? It's called vitamin E. It's called a chain breaking antioxidant. That's the importance of vitamin E. And I was with a colleague just over the weekend, and she said, I stopped taking vitamin E because Ray Peat said to stop taking fat, stop taking oils. And I said, that's not a good thing to do. You need that vitamin E. It was meant to be inside the foods that come with grains, especially wheat. It's called wheat germ oil. And so I bet a lot of the people that you are followed by they're gluten-free. They don't even have grain in their diet because they're afraid of grain. And so therefore they don't have vitamin E, and therefore they don't have the chain breaking antioxidant that we were supposed to be endowed with by our diet.
I have an article pulled up from Ray Peat, so I'm interested to hear where that person said that, but I got to read it. I have the article pulled up. So he says, an excess of iron destroys vitamin E. So that's interesting that he would suggest that, because I think from your case, we see, okay, we have an accumulation of iron. Well, now Ray Peat is saying one of the consequences of iron is that it actually destroys vitamin E. So therefore, if we have less vitamin E, then we're going to have more of these lipid peroxidation events, because vitamin E is an antioxidant that stops that cascade. And so we need to return back to the iron.
If people realized that oxygen is the second most reactive element on the planet, it's the source of oxidative stress, number one. Number two, if people realized how little copper was in their diet and how it's been engineered out of our bodies over the last 100 years, if people had a clue about how much iron they were exposed to generationally and then in their own diet and in the soil and things like that, and then begin to study just those three elements, oxygen, copper, and iron, and see how they interact, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we got a crisis on our hands. And these two metals, copper and iron, are the only two metals on the planet that can react with oxygen. It's not like there's 100 metals, there's two. They're called redox active metals. There are only two. And so it's really important, if you're trying to minimize oxidative stress, which is the source of all conditions on the planet. If you're trying to minimize oxidative stress, well, then you better understand how to regulate and balance copper and iron. And I absolutely understand the hysteria about the lipids, but we've got to put it into the context of how was our physiology designed in the beginning? What were we meant to have at our disposal? What were the nutrients that Mother Nature and our Maker wanted us to have access to? And we don't have that same exposure today that even we had 100 years ago, even 150 years ago. So it's just, again, missing information, missing truth.
Very, very interesting. I'm clearly not an expert on this topic, so I just like picking your brain on certain things that are a little bit conflicting amongst communities. But
Well, yeah.
I don't think it's that conflicting though. I think you both favor saturated fats, and
both acknowledge lipid peroxidation exists.
And I've only read that he would suggest vitamin E.
Yeah, that's interesting. But okay.
Well, wait. Can we circle back to vitamin A really quickly to give?
Yeah, sure.
Takeaway. So what is your final argument that we?
So let's clarify. We're going to do the pin drop. Said.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about two subjects that people may be familiar with. We're going to talk about fluoride and cholesterol.
Yeah.
Okay. And so fluoride, it's the most reactive element on the planet. So got fluoride is number one and oxygen is number two. And so they put it in toothpaste, they put it in dental rinses, and it's everywhere, right?
Sarah found a website that shows whether your county has added fluoride to the water. Mm-hmm. Of course, we are in that. We're moving to a place that has a well, so very fortunate with that.
Okay.
They actually say on the website, like, it's this huge deal. If you are living in a county that doesn't add fluoride, you really need to take extra care that your teeth health doesn't go backward.
That's not true at all. So somewhere between 70 to 75% of the water sanitation systems in the country have fluoride, and it fluxes. There's battles all over the country about this. Well, there's 13 Nobel laureates on record as saying this is a really bad idea.
13?
Yes, 13. And there's a really important book. I don't know whether we talked about this, but it's called Fluoride, the Devil's Poison, and written by a dentist. And he was challenged by one of his patients. She was about to do a fluoride rinse, and she said, "No, you're not going." She says, "Have you ever researched this? That this is a good thing?" He said, "I don't need to research it. I was taught that this was essential in dental school." She said, "Well, you're not going to put it in my mouth until you personally research it." And so he said, "Okay, I'll take the challenge." And so when he started to get into the research, he found out that very early on, you get two perspectives. Fluoride is the second coming, and it's a poison. He said, "Well, it can't be both." And so he created 25 linear feet of research. And I met him at a Weston A. Price meeting in Chicago years ago. A very articulate individual. And he wrote this book, Fluoride, the Devil's Poison. And it really pulls the curtain back on the truth of the dark side of fluoride. Now, I bring it up because people are still debating this. It's a very emotionally charged topic, and there's no resolution, even though it's the most reactive element on the planet. And even though we know that munition workers suffer from mineral loss because of their exposure to fluoride. I mean, it's just, I could go on for a couple hours about the things that fluoride does, but we're supposed to believe that it's good for our teeth, wink, wink. And it's like, I will challenge the two of you to get that book, Fluoride, the Devil's Poison.
Yeah.
See if you can read it. See if you can get to the last chapter. I had to stop. I got so unsettled and upset by it. And I've read a lot of books, but that's one book I said, I can't finish it. I don't want to know the ending to this story. It's that dark. So that's one subject, fluoride. Second subject is something called cholesterol. So that when we had the great oxygen event, there were three things that popped up on the planet. Copper, enzymes called multi-copper oxidases, which allow us to turn oxygen into water. It's a big deal. And cholesterol. And cholesterol has been on the planet since the great oxygen event. It's not a poison. But yet, in 1955, when Ike has his heart attack, we were trained like circus bears. I got to stop eating cholesterol. And for 65 years, almost 70 years, actually 71 years. Scientists debated whether cholesterol was good for you or not, and the particle size and all the different permutations of cholesterol. It's like, oh my God, it's been on the planet since the beginning, and you're still debating. It's like, and you can get a group of 100 cardiologists together, and they will fractionate into this very polarized position about whether this is good or not. And then we got exposed to statins and what that's doing, and it's like, wait a minute, this is so finally in 2016, Raznikov and Diamond published a very important study and put to rest, stop this insanity. Cholesterol does not cause heart disease. What they failed to tell us is that it's the iron that was in our diet that was causing lipid peroxidation that Ray Peat gets all worked up about. And so they didn't tell us the full story. They didn't tell us that, in fact, LDL, the so-called bad booga wooga cholesterol, becomes HDL, the good cholesterol, the happy cholesterol. There's an enzyme that does that. Did you know that? Yeah. It's called acyl cholesterol transferase. And guess what mineral it requires in order to do that?
Copper.
You got to have copper. How about that? What a surprise. And so what causes cholesterol to rise, the LDL to rise? It's a lack of copper. And the guy that figured that out, his name is Leslie Clavet. He's still alive. He discovered this in 1973. This is about the time that they were coming out with statins. And for 5 cents, you could get enough copper to stop the cholesterol rise, or you could spend $5 and buy a statin and get the same outcome. And we know where Big Pharma came out, right? Made a lot more money selling the most profitable class of medications on the history of the planet are statins. And they're destroying a substance that goes back to the beginning of oxygen on the planet. Try to make sense out of that, okay? So then you got that. So fluoride, we're still debating. Cholesterol, many people are still debating. And then we have what's called son of cholesterol. It's called vitamin D. Oh yeah, cholesterol becomes vitamin D when it's kissed by the sunlight, right?
Yeah.
And so now we have this raging debate in the country about vitamin D. We need more vitamin D. Not thinking about, well, what's the metabolism? What are the metabolic steps to make vitamin D? You got to have magnesium. You got to have cholesterol. You got to have sunlight. You know, it's not complicated. And low vitamin D is associated with disease. It does not cause disease. Again, all of the insanity of cholesterol was based on studies of correlation, not causation. Do flies cause garbage? Do firemen cause fires? No, but they're both there. They're associated with those events. The flies seem to show up with the garbage, so maybe they do cause it. Well, the firemen always seem to show up at the fire. Did they cause it? And so low vitamin D is a sign of inflammation. Oh yeah, we were talking about inflammation before, right? That's the third stage of oxidative stress, right? Oh, wait a minute. So what actually causes that inflammation thingy? A buildup of iron and a lack of magnesium. Oh yeah, the guy that figured that out, his name is Weglicki and his partner Phillips. 1992, Weglicki and Phillips figured out that magnesium deficiency is the cellular event that precedes the trigger for inflammation. So what does it take to make vitamin D? Oh, you got to have magnesium. Oh, so maybe the people who have low vitamin D all have low magnesium. Yeah, how about that? they're right in sync with each other. And what causes magnesium to leave the liver? Oh yeah, that iron. Too much iron. Why is the iron building? Because there's no bioavailable copper. So why am I sharing all this? We have absolute insanity about fluoride, absolute insanity about cholesterol, now son of cholesterol, and now we're supposed to debate vitamin A. And I just wanted to create for the context for the listeners that this is not an isolated debate. Every nutrient in the world of nutrition is hotly debated. And it's like, good heavens, why? It doesn't make sense to me. But there's a lot of controversy now about retinol because people don't seem to understand retinol metabolism. They don't seem to understand that retinol metabolism is really important for the body in general, thyroid in particular. You know, there's a little protein called transthyretin, TTR, transports thyroid hormone and retinol. Think that might be important for the body? Transthyretin. And when that protein's not right, oh yeah, you've got hypothyroidism. Think hypothyroidism isn't an epidemic in this country? When did that start? About the time that Eisenhower had his heart attack and they told us to stop eating cholesterol. And any food that had cholesterol had retinol. Oh, wow, what a coincidence. And so, again, there's so much confusion about this. And then to demonize retinoic acid, as some people do, like it's something dirty. Oh, you don't want retinoic acid. It's really bad. It's like, good God. It's like the retinoic acids are instrumental in our metabolism. And if you don't have the nuclear receptors, RORs and RARs and RXRs, well, there isn't communication taking place inside the nucleus. And the proteins aren't going to get made properly. And again, this idea of cherry picking the literature and cherry picking nutrition to say that, well, this is okay, but that's bad. It's like, let's come back a step or two and figure out, how does the body make copper bioavailable? Oh yeah, you need that retinol. That retinoic acid is really important. And it's unfortunate that more people don't have more time to do the reading to get the full story. And the tragedy is, I've been reading articles now for 10 solid years, 2 to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week for 10 years. And I'm just now beginning to understand the truth. And so someone jumping onto a Google-driven internet site looking for some soundbite to say, well, what's safe and what's good and what's proper, it ain't going to happen. Again, what did I learn this weekend? This is going to blow your listeners' minds. That when you take vitamin D supplements, it suppresses a hormone in the body called hepcidin. Hepcidin regulates iron. And we're led to believe that it affects 3 tissues. It affects the liver, it affects the gut, and it affects the spleen. Well, I came across a study from 2007, only to find out that really what hepcidin is really focused on is the spleen. And when you take vitamin D, it suppresses that hormone, which then affects the ability of the spleen to recycle red blood cells and recycle the iron. And then it starts to create the perception that the person's anemic. And so they're given more iron. And what does that do? It creates metabolic mayhem inside their body. And so the push is intense to take more vitamin D. Well, again, nothing in nature exists in isolation. Everything's in tandem. Magnesium and calcium work together. Copper and iron work together. Vitamin A and vitamin D work together. And if you don't know that, then you believe the pundits who are pushing mononutrient focus, which is very dangerous. And so I think people have, they have an incomplete understanding of metabolism to decide who do they want to believe. And most people are just basing their decisions on their belief system. Well, I believe this person or I believe that person because they made a compelling argument, but they didn't get the totality of the information to say, do you have all the facts that you need in order to make this decision? And most people are too impatient, too busy to take the time to study it. And for whatever reason, I still to this day don't know how this started with me. But once I started to dig in, I wasn't going to back down and I wasn't going to stop. And I'm not going to stop until I have a better sense that people are waking up and are benefiting from the wisdom of Mother Nature. And that's basically the protocol I stole from Mother Nature. And it's just trying to get people to accept it. And it's a day-by-day battle, as you can well imagine.
Yeah. We're very fortunate that you've taken these last 10 years to do all that work for us.
Yeah.
I don't know who else would have done it.
Yeah.
Well, again, and I don't want to mislead people that I've got total truth because I don't. Again, I've only focused on 3 minerals: magnesium, copper, and iron. It's really, those are the 3 that I've really focused on. I mean, I've read a lot about calcium and potassium and sodium, but really focused on 3 minerals. And I've really focused on vitamin A and vitamin D. And I'm pretty well versed in those. And I don't have the academic knowledge that a Ray Peat has or Garrett Smith. I mean, these guys have their doctorate in a specific area, but that doesn't mean that they have my level of knowledge about those minerals, especially as it relates to oxidative stress. And that's my real focal point is what do we need to do to lower oxidative stress in the body? And unfortunately, it's not rocket science. And that's I think the biggest surprise to me is that when you get into it and you realize how consistent the literature is, it's absolutely amazing.
It's cool. And just to remind the audience, if they're interested more of Morley's root cause protocol, RCP, go to what website? RCP123. RCP123.
.org. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So one more follow-up on iron. I have one
Go
more.
ahead.
So
Go ahead.
a really hot topic is histamine, right? So like, oh no, I can't have bone broth because I have histamine issues, even though bone broth was like very ancestrally consistent.
Right.
I sent you a few research articles, and I can pull them up on my computer. Kind of sharing the relationship between iron overload and histamine, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. That I think the one that was most interesting to me was the article that talks about using catalase, which is a very powerful antioxidant enzyme, and it's designed to neutralize hydrogen peroxide. And what is hydrogen peroxide? When it mixes with iron, it creates a cascade of problems. It creates that Fenton reaction. So they use catalase, and they also use an iron chelator, desferoxamine. And when they did that, the histamine levels collapsed. And so I had not seen that article before. I was really grateful that you sent it to me because it really puts it into a different light.
Was it this one?
I think it was, hold on here. Yeah, it's actually the one, hold on. The one by Boros. Yeah, that's the one. Yep. Yep. Very important study because it really reveals how targeted this process is. And again, what's causing this histamine response? We're back to those lipoxygenase enzymes again. Mm-hmm. They're very intense enzyme family. And so the other research that I've done in this area is that if you have, it isn't necessarily the iron per se, it's what are called, there's a class of agents called histamine promoters. And so um, ghrelin is a histamine promoter. Hydrogen peroxide is a histamine promoter. And I don't fully understand the metabolic mechanism, but the point is when histamines are building in the body, it means there's a lack of bioavailable copper, because one of the many functions of ceruloplasmin is to express histaminase enzyme. Histaminase enzyme neutralizes histamines. We know it today as DAO, diamine oxidase. And its true origin was called dextramine oxidase. And so proteins were supposed to unfold to the left. Well, for your listeners, it would be this way. That's left for them, whatever. But when they unfold to the right, that creates problems in the body. That's an error message that sends a signal. If it's unfolding to the right, that's not good. And so DAO, dextramine oxidase, is sent to correct that problem. And that then became histaminase. And it's just a lot of terminology that overlaps. But the point is, the people that discovered ceruloplasmin were very quick in 1948 to say that in the presence of histamines, there's a 4-fold increase in histaminase activity by ceruloplasmin. So that people who are having a histamine reaction, that's a clinical sign of low bioavailable copper. And so this happens all the time, especially when people are trying to ingest either vitamin C or beef liver or cod liver oil. Any one of those three can trigger a histamine reaction. And it isn't consistent. It isn't always all three. It might be one of the three. And invariably, what I tell people to do is go to an NAET practitioner and clear the allergic reaction so that you can begin to build up the bioavailable copper that you get through those foods. And we have a histamine crisis in this country now. And again, it's a clear sign that there's a buildup of oxidative stress. At a macro level, you don't get histamines if you don't have oxidative stress. And it means that there's within the bodies of people in this country, there's a loss of bioavailable copper to neutralize that event. It's very important for people to realize that we were not born with mast cell disorder. We were born with copper deficiency. There's a difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what would be the first thing somebody should do to handle their histamines? Go to the NAET, you said?
I would do two things. I would actually do three things right away. One is find a good practitioner who does NAET.
Okay.
Second, I would do what you guys did today, do a blood donation, get the crisscross on your elbow. And the third thing I would do is I would find someone who does emotional freedom technique and have them do the tapping technique to release the fear that people have. When they get a histamine reaction, you think you're broken. And it's very frightening. And when does stress begin for people with high IQ? When they feel out of control. So smart people who have food reactions feel broken and very fearful. And so they need to do emotional freedom technique to release the fear that they're broken. They're just out of balance. And again, we've been raised in a society that's built upon a citadel of disease. And everyone thinks that they're going to get some disease. And we just have to come back to the basics that our ancestors did not live like this. They did not walk around with masks on. They did not live in mortal fear of the next booga wooga bug. Because think about what the last 6 months have been like for us. How many people do you know have been openly talking about steps you can take to strengthen the host, strengthen the immune system of the individual, versus the tsunami of fear porn about how there's a big bug coming and you got to be careful. Really. Think, who can you identify that's been talking about strengthening the host? Does anyone come to mind?
Few people, but they're very much in this alternative sphere.
Yeah.
And it's a minority,
Yeah.
a dramatic minority. The vast majority are attack the guest, which is ridiculous. And all of the ancient healing arts are based on strengthen the host. Acupuncture, Native American Indian medicine, Ayurvedic medicine are all based on what can we do to strengthen the immune system of the individual.
I think
There's no talk about that.
like someone can do is just eat better, and I think that that's the most confusing thing to me is that's not being like advertised as like what we should be doing
Right.
in this pandemic. Dr. Saladino had an Instagram post where he showed like some sort of screenshot of COVID testing, but it was like sponsored by Pepsi or Walmart or something like that. And so it was like, get your COVID test and then get free McDonald's. So there's just like, still junk food is like prevalent, and it's, again, all of that stuff is very fortified with iron.
We love this. So we got our blood drawn and then sent to like a refreshments room, and it was
Sure.
all fortified cereal grain snacks.
Absolutely. Lots of iron.
Yeah.
And lots of sugar and lots of iron.
Refined sugar, everywhere.
Yeah.
But back to your EFT.
Yeah.
Would you recommended the book like Biology of the Brain or something, or?
Bruce Lipton's The Biology of Belief.
Biology of Belief.
Biology of Belief. Wonderful book. And he's got a lot of videos, as you probably know. And he talks about the fact that the subconscious mind is 1,000,000 times stronger than the conscious mind. So you've got to get rid of the demons in the subconscious mind. And you don't have to go to a psychoanalyst for the rest of your life. The beauty of EFT is it's short-term. It's a very focused and targeted intervention to get you to release the electrical charge you have about some issue. Very, very important.
I just wanted to include that because I feel like people still think that kind of stuff is a little bit woo-woo and it's not correlated to their recovery or their healing. And I feel like it really does have a place in anybody's recovery process.
Whenever I'm dealing with someone who's been doing the RCP, first thing you have to do is say, well, what is your version of the RCP? Because everyone takes a slightly different spin on it.
Ours, we gave our version last time.
Okay. But yeah, exactly. But the thing is, once you get past that, then it's always one of those 3 roadblocks. Have they donated blood? Have they dealt with their food and airborne allergies through NAET? And have they been to an EFT practitioner to release their fears? And when people get super stuck, the first thing I ask is, what have you done to release your fear? And invariably, I'm batting like 1,000. Like they've not been to someone. So you got to do it. Until you do that, you're not going to overcome the emotional block that comes with fear. Prevents the benefit of the protocol from working. It's just the way the body works.
So we are already coming at an hour and a half. I think that 30 minutes is like not enough for magnesium. Is it okay if we kind of wrap up the iron in today's discussion and then we leave magnesium for another?
Sure, we can do that. Absolutely.
Again, okay.
You were a hit.
Yeah.
Everybody.
So what does that mean, a hit? I mean, like what?
I'm not really up on my lingo either, but it means like you were enjoyed.
A lot of clicking.
Okay.
A lot of clicking.
Well, good. That's great.
That's a lot of great things to say.
Yeah, and I learned a lot in this video. I think there were some loose strings from the last video for me, and I think that today cleared them up a lot. Do you have any final iron questions?
Yeah, so this will be iron overload part 2, and then we'll go on to magnesium in the next one.
That sounds great.
We discuss how magnesium is related, but that was just a sneak preview for what.
The magnesium burn rate. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a really simple concept, but we can take the deeper dive because I think it's important for people to realize how really essential that mineral is to allowing us to be kind of chill and not overreact to things.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Morley. And we're looking forward to the next conversation. If you remember last time, we ended with behave like a angel. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Behave like
Like a angel.
There you go.